This is the Resilient and Resource Podcast. On today's episode, I speak with Jennie. And I find out that Jennie's relationship with resilience has been marked by a strong sense of just knowing that giving up simply wasn't an option. So unraveling the impact of this survival mindset has been a lifelong journey that has been punctuated by deep and significant losses. So Jennie, who is now a Reiki master, has learned to explore the wisdom of the body, ways of working with difficult emotions, and now she has a passion for helping others do the same. I'm your host, Danette Adams, so please join me today for this powerful conversation about loss, grief, and discovering resources within and without. Okay, I am so excited to welcome to the podcast today, Jennie. Jennie, thank you for being here.
It's an honor.
Great. So I like starting these conversations with the concept of resilience and having the guest speak about their relationship to resilience. So this could be historically, it could be things you learned growing up, things you've just learned recently. So tell me about Jennie and resilience.
For me, I feel like, as I was thinking about this, I feel like resilience has kind of been forced on me. Not that I'm ungrateful to have the resilient tools that I have now, but it's often felt like trial by fire. You either survive or you don't. And in that, looking back, I realized that I was making a conscious choice to not quit. I don't think I knew it at the time. It didn't feel like there was a choice. It was simply, here's this big situation. Most of them around grief and loss. And it was either sink or swim. And I didn't know that sink was an option. And so therefore, I had to learn how to swim.
That's interesting. So you mentioned around grief and loss. So what are some of the challenges that have in your life that have caused you to consider this concept of resilience and to look at the quitting, sinking, or swimming idea in your life?
Grief has been my biggest teacher in my life. And so I've lost a lot of people close to me. And not that I want it to define me, but when you ask about resilience, this is where I've learned it, is through walking through the grief. When I was in university, that's when it started. I lost a roommate to cancer. And growing up, dealing with emotions wasn't something, I think, that in the culture at the time that there wasn't any space for. And so growing up as a kid, I was taught, not necessarily with direct words, but implied, and looking at the actions of the adults around me, you don't talk about yourself. You don't feel proud. You never, ever, heaven forbid you would ever tell somebody that you felt really good about something you had accomplished. That wasn't acceptable. You stuffed it all down. And I wonder, as I look back, I wonder if that, in my parents' generation, was inherited by them from their parents who lived through the Russian Revolution and fled horrible circumstances. And so in those circumstances, you have to be resilient, or literally for them, it was a life and death choice.
Right. So
and there was no, yeah. There was no space for managing emotions or processing emotions or for sitting with anything. Like when whatever army it was that came through, my great-grandmother had to think fast. And if she didn't want all her cutlery to be stolen, she threw it in the fireplace and covered it up so that the soldiers, even if they knew it was there, they couldn't touch it because it was too hot. Like, that's brilliance.
Right.
That's resilience. But there's no space in there to think about managing that fear or that desire to protect your family. You just have to. And so that's what they lived with. That's what my grandparents grew up with. There's no time. There's no space. Right. You stuff it. And so I suspect, I'm not a psychologist. So this is all just my thoughts and musings. I suspect, though, that that's what my parents inherited because that's all that their parents knew. That was how they survived. And so, by example, that is what the adults in my younger years demonstrated. You stuff it. You don't deal with it. It's not a public thing. And so then when my roommate was diagnosed with cancer, I decided, okay, I'm going to deal with this the way that I've been taught. I'm going to stuff everything that I'm feeling, and service was the other big thing. You help each other. Again, in order to survive traumatic circumstances, when you're in a community, you depend on each other.
Right.
Survival. So I thought, okay, I will set aside myself completely and support my friend. And this wasn't it's not that I was trying to be noble or it just felt like the thing that needed to happen.
Right. And that you were saying from your childhood, though, it was positive or negative emotions. Whatever came up, you just stuff and serve.
Exactly.
Right. So you were you were going on automatic pilot on what you had learned.
Yeah. And so that's what I did. And I learned after the fact that didn't serve me very well, because after she died, I ended up very depressed. I was on medication for a while. And through talking with a counselor, I learned, one, that I'm fall into the category of a highly sensitive person, which was a helpful identifier for me. Not that any of us want to be put in boxes, but sometimes we like to know that these labels make us normal.
Right. Or recognize it resonates with what we're experiencing, because I've had that same conversation about myself and being highly sensitive. It resonated so much with me as I read my first book about it. I was crying through it because I recognized myself on these pages where I had never had any other affirmation before that's what was going on. So that,
exactly. And it was freeing. In that moment, it was freeing that I didn't have to hide this, that this could actually be normal. And I couldn't get there yet, but I had the sense that there's also a gift in this. And so then that becomes a lifelong process, which I'm still exploring. But I realized that stuffing it and serving at the expense of myself, which I didn't know I was doing, didn't work. And it wasn't the healthiest way for me to do it. Given that I wasn't living through a revolution, I wasn't in a literal survival mode, I wasn't dealing with my own life or death choices in the moment. And so I want to acknowledge that there's a whole lot of privilege and luxury and space in there that not everybody has. My grandparents and great-grandparents certainly didn't have that. And so when I realized that there were other ways to do this, then I thought, okay, actually, I don't think I realized there were other ways yet. When I realized that what I had done hadn't worked, then I started looking for other ways.
Right. And so then when the next challenge in your life came up, had you learned something that would help you then do less of the stuffing, more of the experiencing and sitting with the difficult emotions?
Yeah, not quite yet. It took a couple
progress, right? We're works in progress.
Exactly. And hallelujah that we can be works in progress. Oh my goodness. It's so much easier to acknowledge that, hey, I took a baby step, not that, oh darn, I'm not done yet. There were two quick deaths. Like I said, this was grief. So there's lots of good things that have also happened in my life. I want to say that. But resilience has come from grief. And so I lost my brother. And then a year and a half later, we lost our infant son. And after that, I realized that, okay, I'm not dealing with this very well. And so then I started reaching out because I remembered that counseling had helped. Talking to somebody outside of my own circles had helped last time. So I did that again. And then I found the courage to and was actually surrounded by 3 amazing women who had also lost their babies. And having someone who had experienced it walk together with you is support like none other. Especially because they weren't afraid of it. Like, I had all kinds of emotions and all kinds of wild and crazy thoughts and all kinds of, like, there were times when I thought maybe I was crazy. Maybe I was. But they weren't afraid of that. And they sat there with me in that. And they walked with me. And so that was a very powerful thing, was to be able to have friends and meet. 2 of these women were people who I had never met before. It was very powerful. And through that, I also, this is when I was introduced to a different way of understanding how the body works. And so 3 separate people, one of them was one of this trio of women who was walking with me, at 3 different times told me that I needed to go to see this craniosacral therapist. I was like, what is this? Is this even real? This is so weird. I've not even heard of this. Is this really going to help me? But, sometimes the universe just beats you over the side of the head enough times and you feel like, okay, fine. I'm going to go. I'll try this out. And maybe I'll never go again. So I went to see Jules, and that was in 2008, and I still see her every month. And so it was so powerful for me because she was able to tap into what my body was saying without me needing to engage my brain. And so through that, I learned, okay, there's more to this than I was ever taught. And so what I've come to learn, so now I'm a Reiki master, which if you had told me back when my university roommate died that I would be in this situation, I would have been like, no way.
Right.
Like, you're crazy. You're ridiculous. This is not true. That was the start of it, because I realized that our bodies have their own wisdom. And we haven't always been taught how to, well, 1, that it's possible, and 2, that we can actually access it. We don't always need the third party. There are times when the third party is essential and helpful, and it is incredibly valuable. But we can also tap into it ourselves. And the fact that as I went through this more and more, that my body was telling things and my brain said, oh, well, yeah, that's actually true. That is how I feel.
So can you give me an example of this, of how your body speaks to you? And maybe even connecting it to how it speaks to you on a regular day and then during grief. What's an example of how your body speaks to you in grief and loss?
The first time that I recognized that I was actually hearing what my body was saying was, so there's a little bit of context. So Nathan is our son. Nathan had died. And through the second half of the pregnancy, as I knew and progressed through it, my prayer was, please let me keep him. I just want to keep my baby. And he died. He lived for 2 hours. It was an amazing, profound, sacred, holy experience, but he still died. Then I started to go see Jules. And I remember asking, she had wanted to know if I had a question. And so I said, well, it'd be nice to know why this happened. I was not actually expecting an answer because I was told God works in mysterious ways and we don't always understand what's going on. Okay, fine. But I asked the question anyway because that was the question that I wanted. And her response was, well, hold on, I'll go ask. And had I not been laying down on her treatment table, I probably would have fallen on the floor because I thought, hold on, wait a minute. You can talk to him? How? But it was huge. she came back with an answer. He said that he knew that it wouldn't break you. I thought, oh. And that goes back to that I didn't know that sinking was an option.
Right.
So I guess that's true. Yeah. And in that moment, I knew that it wouldn't. I knew that this was really hard, but I knew that it wouldn't. And I didn't know how I knew that. But that connected on a level that I didn't understand. There was something in my body that knew. And then, so this was also very new, and it was very different than what I had been taught was okay in my growing up church. And so I was testing this with a bunch of people. Like, so I'm going to see this person, and these are the experiences that I'm having, and they feel really good and really genuine. But there's this old thing that I grew up with that says that maybe this isn't safe. How do I hold these two together? And there was a moment when I was painting the outside of the house, and all of a sudden I realized that because Jules had been able to talk to him, that meant that I could talk to him too. And that meant that I did get to keep him. And in that moment, I had to sit down.
Wow. That is so profound.
And so I still talk to him. He still shows up. He would be 13. He still shows up. And so I've gotten to keep him.
Right.
And what a profound example to me. So spirituality is tied up in all of this for me. What it made very abundantly clear to me was that maybe the doctrine that I had been taught as a kid from people who were well-meaning, and this is what they knew, and they were doing the best with what they had, maybe that wasn't fitting me anymore. Maybe there was more. And maybe, and this was the big one, maybe I wanted to know more. And then I decided I did. And so since then, it's been a process of realizing that, pick your name, God, the creator, the universe, source, divine love. It doesn't matter to me what name it is. I tend to use God because it's what I'm familiar with. But God is way bigger than what I was ever told or taught. And again, not by any fault of anyone, but I was discovering God was so much bigger. And together with that is that humans, we have more power and more capacity to go above and beyond what we thought we would ever be able to do. That's me personally. So I realize that I have more power and more capacity to do things that I never thought were possible.
Right.
Like having conversations and an ongoing relationship with all my dead people.
Right. And is that what sort of then led you in wanting to know more?
Yes.
Is that was what led you to study Reiki?
Yeah, and it was actually Jules' suggestion. Random. One day she said, "Hey, I think you might be a good fit for this course that my friend is teaching. She's into Reiki. She's a Reiki master, and she's teaching this course. I think you should take it." And it was one of those moments. Have you ever had them when someone suggests something and you just act on it without actually engaging your thinking brain? And then when you get to the course, in my case, then they say, "What brought you here?" And you actually have no idea. My friend told me that I should do this, so here I am. I don't actually know why I'm here.
Yeah. I absolutely have had that experience, and it has blown me out of the water. Someone told me about 15, 20 years ago, "Oh, this school is looking for a teacher, and I think you should go apply." And I'm like, I'm not a teacher. Like, I'm not a registered teacher. I teach things in my life, but I'm not a teacher. And did I not work at that school for 15 years after that recommendation? And life-changing. Yeah. So amazing. Wow,
yeah.
incredible.
And so it's gone on from there. There's been more and more. I've now completed the Reiki, the basic amount of Reiki training. So I took 4 courses, and now I have a practice, which I also never would have thought that I have. that I would have. And I know that, and people have told me that when they have a session with me, they can feel the difference. And I think, wow, what an honor and what a privilege to be able to turn what I experienced into something that led me down a path that turned into something that was so beautiful and so helpful for someone else.
And when we're sitting with loss and grief, those don't even seem like possibilities. When you're leaning into those horrible feelings of being sort of abandoned, it's just very challenging to see that there's anything. So what an amazing progression from the beginning of your story until now. I would love to know, Jennie, what you love about yourself. You talked about that there was no option for sinking or swimming, and I think I love that about you already, and I just learned that. But what is it about yourself? What quality or key strength do you have that you think has contributes to your ongoing learning and growing in this area of resilience?
I've learned that, and I wasn't always this way, but when people ask me about my losses, I will tell them anything. I will tell them all the things. And so often I've heard from people that in just me allowing myself to be me and just saying what's on my heart or what my experience was like, the hard parts and the really ugly parts and the beautiful parts, that they find it so meaningful. And I never would have thought that because I was taught to stuff it. And so realizing that there is this beauty in being vulnerable, in safe ways, of course, but there's power in it, in being vulnerable with friends and people around. Like, I remember when you asked me about this, I told you, I was like, there's no question off the table. You can ask me anything you want. Yeah.
And I see that amazingly, I see that tied to, so your openness, you're willing to be vulnerable with people, that seems to open up the connections with other people. So your resilience that you had growing up was just, there's no option, I'm just going to keep going and I don't know why. But to you reaching out to others. So yes, you can access it within yourself, but your vulnerability automatically means you're connected to people that are helping you, people that you're helping.
Yeah.
It's like you're resilient and resourced, which is like the reason I named this podcast this, that you have access to both and you access both with vulnerability and strength, which I think is just fascinating.
Thank you.
And beautiful. It's beautiful.
Thank you. So I'm not always that way, just to be clear.
Yes, again, the work in progress idea.
Exactly.
Yeah. So during this pandemic time, what are some other resources that you have accessed when, you have a family, you have work, things have changed for everybody, maybe triggering old traumas and losses during this time of loss of connection with people? So what are some other resources that you've reached out to during this time?
Friends, but I still go back to this. I go back to these things that I've learned about myself and this whole thing about how much bigger God is than what I thought and how much bigger I am than I thought. And when I say I mean all of us human beings. I really think we're all pieces of the divine walking around with skin on. And we're all in a process of learning what that is and what that means. And some of that has been really forced upon us in the last year. And I've also leaned hard on the ways that I learned to process all of those big emotions that I had. I have an unshakable knowing that I am supported, and it's within me. Sometimes I have to dig deeper to get to it, but I know that it's there. And it's because, can I tell the story about beating up God with the baseball
I
bat?
absolutely would love you to tell this story.
So shortly after Nathan died, I was understandably really sad. And my arms would physically ache because I didn't have the baby to hold. And then I'd get mad. And there was one day when I was laying on our bed, just sobbing. I was so sad, and I can be a bit stubborn. And so I kind of got pissed off. I kind of got mad. And I said to myself, fine, I'm really tired of feeling sad. Because remember, my brother had also died a year and a half before. And so I felt like I had been grieving now for 2 years, and it was just another wave, and then another wave, and then another wave. It's like, fine, I'm just going to deal with all of this right now, which of course is not how it works. But there was a huge amount that I was prepared to deal with. And I cried, and I just let myself sob, and like ugly cry. Like the snot's running out of your nose, and there aren't enough Kleenexes. And the sounds that you're making, you wonder where on earth they're coming from, and are these even human? Is there some weird creature living inside of my voice that's doing all of this? But I kept going. It's like, there's got to be a bottom to this. There's got to be. And so when the desperate crying had finished, then I just got really angry. And I realized I really want to hit something. But I couldn't bring myself to physically hit anything. I tried hitting the pillow. That was not good enough. It's like, okay, so I have a pretty good imagination. So I thought, all right, I'm going to imagine hitting something. It's like, what do I want to hit? And so I'm experimenting with all kinds of things like punching stuff. It's like, no, my fists are not strong enough. And so then in my imagination, I saw a baseball bat lying on the ground. It's like, ooh, that's going to feel really good to hit something with. Okay. And it felt safe because I'm in my imagination. I'm not actually hurting anything. It's like, okay. And so there was a fence post in front of me. Okay. Where these things came from, I have no idea. But I'm pretty sure that this is my body's wisdom saying, hey, you're asking for it. Here's what you need. Here you go. Here's another one. So this fence post, I got a baseball bat. So I hit the fence post. I pummeled the fence post into the ground. I was not done. Fine. What else? And then I realized that I needed to hit God. Because through this, oh shoot, now I'm going to start crying again. Through the whole process, we found out halfway through the pregnancy that Nathan wasn't going to make it. And through the whole process, there was no one to blame. It was nobody's fault. It just happened. And so even though it was nobody's fault, I was still mad. And so the only place that I could put that anger that was safe was to beat God up with his baseball bat. And once I got over the horror of what I was about to do, I just let it fly. And I was able to imagine it so vividly that when I was finally done, I was completely spent. I was exhausted, as if I had physically used my muscles and swung that heavy baseball bat for however long it took. And then as I lay there on my bed, spent, still kind of horrified at what I had just done. It's like, this is not okay. This is not what you're supposed to do. Nobody treats God like this. That's not allowed. As I lay there in that silence, then I heard, it's okay. Your anger is safe with me. It's okay. I love you. And then I cried again for a whole different set of reasons. But it was such a profound healing moment for me to know that, like, there's no greater indignity than beating someone up with a tool. Like, that's horrible. And it was okay. I felt so heard and so understood and so comforted, and this indescribable understanding of how much I was loved and how big God was, that God could actually that God could handle all of that. And so that changed everything.
Wow.
It was still really hard.
Right.
Don't get me wrong.
Oh,
it didn't fix it. Yeah. But it changed everything. And then I knew that nothing was out of bounds. Nothing was off limits. There was no wrong answer. There was no wrong question. And there was no wrong thing to throw at God.
I almost don't even want to speak. It's so exquisitely sad and poignant and yet hopeful that I don't even really know how to respond except to sit with it. And yeah, I think I'll be sitting with that story for a while. Just beautiful, just so sad and beautiful. And so meaningful for you, about like giving
absolutely.
You the hope that nothing was out of bounds, and the fact that you can spend, like you felt like that feeling of being spent, you can spend some of this grief. Yeah.
And I have picked that baseball bat up again, and I've come at God and be like, okay, I need to do this again, and it's always have at her. Right. And then I get it
out. Yeah, it's so powerful too, based on where you come from being raised with the image of God in a certain way, and that you've now come to learn from the wisdom of your body, and to learn that wisdom coming from God can look completely different than it did when you were growing up.
Yeah.
Wow. Powerful. Yeah. I don't want to move on to the next question because I just want to sit with that, but that's going to be kind of odd on a podcast, an audio podcast where people are just listening and me sitting here, taking it and sitting with us. I'll do that later after we're done. But I wonder, with so much that you've learned about your body's wisdom, so much that you've learned about how to look at what you've learned in your past, and how to sit with grief and loss in active and maybe less active ways.
Yes.
What advice would you have for people, whether or not the loss and grief that they're experiencing is even been triggered from this past year of the pandemic, or that they've lost someone in their life? What advice would you have for people who are experiencing things that you've experienced?
I think everyone has lost something during the pandemic. And I think we're fooling ourselves if we think that we haven't. And that said, what I know from experience is that with that loss, there's the potential for something new. And so I opened a business during the pandemic. Who does that? And again, it was one of those things where I realized somebody asked and I said, yes, this is what I am meant to do. And then reality hit and I went, oh my goodness, what did I just say yes to? But there was that unshakable piece that I knew, and I have come to recognize that knowing, because I've tested it so many times, the logical part of my brain has finally given in and said, oh, right, yeah, that's that thing again. All right, fine, I'll shut up. I'm not going to try and talk you out of this. Fine, just go. And so I've learned to experiment and to try things that are inspired and come from this place of knowing that I'm still developing a relationship with. But I'm less afraid of my emotions, and I've learned that they can be, when I'm open to it, they can be a guidepost for me. And this one is really hard because there's sometimes when I feel things and I probably know what they're telling me, I don't want to hear that. And so there's times when I still resist pretty strong. But there are other times when I'm able to sit and I'm able to process. Again, because I have the luxury and the privilege of having the space and the resources to reach out and talk to people, both friends and professional support people, to sit with them and to know that they can shift, and learning how to shift them. Or maybe a better way to put it is learning how to be with them and let them shift. Because there's one thing I've learned, that emotions can't be forced, but they can be attended to. And when we give our attention and let ourselves feel, then there become possibilities. So emotions, what I've learned, chemically have a beginning, a middle, and an end. I didn't know that, which is kind of hopeful. And so there are ways that you can sit with things, and if you let it go all the way through, then it finishes. Somebody told me once that true anger, actually lasts in your body for about 90 seconds. And then if I'm still angry after that 90 seconds, I'm a mom, so there's times when I get angry and frustrated in my house. Perhaps other people can relate. That was a shocker, because I realized, there's times when I'm angry for more than 90 seconds about the same thing. And so then it's a choice. Darn, I don't want that to be a choice. I want that to be someone else's fault. I want that one to be out of my control.
So then if the emotion has a cycle, so that means if we're lasting longer than we're sticking in the middle of it, we're staying there as opposed to letting it flow through. You're saying right in the middle somewhere, we've just held on, clawed on to something and said, I'm not letting go of this anger.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And which annoys me. It really annoys me. Because then what it does, so feeling empowered is such a big deal. So like when I heard that affirmation that I could dump my anger on God, I felt so empowered. It's like, I now have this resource. When I hear that my emotions are my responsibility, that's an empowerment that I'm not sure I always want to have. I'd like that to be blamed on something else. But when I'm in the space where I'm prepared to hold that responsibility and experiment with it and sit with it, then I can rely on some of the tools that I have learned in the last 10 to 12 years through the sessions that I've done with a couple of energy people, Jules being one of them. I've learned a lot from her, and also books that I've read, because I find this so fascinating. And so then I just would take all the things that I could. So if there's one that I would share that I think is accessible to everybody, no matter what kind of resources you have around you, it's one that I learned from Abraham Hicks. And so if people want to search that up, they can. It's called The Emotional Ladder, or Climbing Up the Emotional Scale. And this was a really freeing concept for me. Emotions are our guides. They're guideposts. They're signs. They reflect back to us some information that we need to know. And so basically, if I'm feeling angry, for example, what it means is that there's something going on that I'm not enjoying. Duh, that's obvious. Each emotion that we feel is a chemical signal, like a chemical soup that exists in our body. And it also emits a vibrational signal, like an energetic wave pattern. Like our heart has, they can measure the energy that comes off of our heart, our brains have it. Well, our emotions affect that. And so different emotions will have a different vibration. And the one that tends to be the lowest is stuff like fear and grief and depression, despair, powerlessness, those kinds of things. And that makes sense. Like when we're at our lowest, So those are kind of the things that we're identifying with at that time. On the other hand, on the other end of the spectrum, when we're on a mountaintop experience, it's joy and peace and empowerment and freedom, pure love, appreciation, gratitude, those kinds of things. Those are at the other end of the spectrum. And so often when we're grieving, the people around us care. They care so much about us and they want to help. And I used to do this all the time. You try and just make the person feel better. You try and get, what we're trying to do is to get them from the bottom of the ladder in grief to the top of the ladder, feeling joy. And we're trying to do that with one sentence or one card or one just do this kind of suggestion. Well, it's a long ladder. And if we think about climbing an actual ladder or climbing a big long flight of stairs, our legs are not long enough to get from the bottom to the top in one step. We can't do it. It has to be one step at a time. And so energetically, if we think of it all as vibration, like if you imagine waves on the lake, they don't go from ripples to huge waves all at once. It's a process. Same thing. And so if we're feeling really, really low, so for example, I'm a mom, I have kids, sometimes I get angry. If I'm feeling angry about something, if I first acknowledge it, and that step I didn't realize was important until much more recently. Stop, feel this. Yep, I'm angry. Okay, and just feel it for a minute, maybe 90 seconds. And then, if I have this space, of course, I'm not going to do this in front of my children. I'm not going to react in front of them. This is the time when I go lock myself in the bathroom later, have a little bit of a cry, get it out. Then I reach for, once you've named it, once you've felt it, then I reach for the next best feeling thought, the next step. And so it's the next different level of wave on the lake. And so maybe then I can sit with it and I can think, okay, they did do this nice thing. Okay, so maybe I'm just frustrated about this one particular thing that happens. So now I've shifted it. Now I'm not angry anymore. I'm frustrated by this thing. Okay, so that feels better to me. It actually feels better to feel frustrated. Okay, and then I try again. Okay, once I've sat with that for a minute, am I ready to try another one? Yep, I can. All right, and so then I reach for the next best. And you keep going through this process. So maybe then I'm just irritated. I'm irritated by this teenage behavior. I'm irritated by this whatever. This is normal. This happens. Okay. So now instead of angry, I'm not frustrated anymore. I'm just irritated. Okay. And if I sit with it, maybe I can sit with it one more time. And then I just decide, you know what? I'm bored. I'm tired of having this argument with them. I'm just bored. And that's better than being angry. And then what happens in our brains is we've actually shifted from working from our brain stem back into working with the front of our brains, which is where we have our creativity and problem solving and thinking parts. And then as we move up, we access more of the problem solving parts. And then we're in a better space to respond rather than react. And so sometimes you can only get up one. Like for me, when Nathan had died, I was grieving. And then I had to spend a long time being angry. Angry is actually higher than grief. And it felt better to be angry. And so if you are with a grieving person and they used to be just despondent and now they're just angry, let them be angry because it's actually a step up. We get uncomfortable with anger. And granted, there are improper ways and inappropriate ways to express it. But it's okay to be angry. It's okay to feel angry. And that was the gift that those 3 women friends who had experienced an infant loss, that they gave me. They let me be angry. They said, yeah, say all the things you need to say. We felt them too. It is not wrong.
That's what I love that affirmation they gave you, but also the ladder. It affirms that each emotion is valid in some way. At that
Yes.
moment, an angry response or a grieving response is valid, but it doesn't necessarily mean you need to stay at that rung. And then that you actually have something about your own determination to sit with the emotion all the way through and then move up the ladder, even if it's slowly, like you said, even if it's just one rung, is very hopeful. Yeah. It's very hopeful that you're not invalidating the emotion just to move up a rung.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah.
And sometimes it is, like, it's a cliche, but there are 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And that's okay. But the beauty of it is, the more that I practice this, and believe me, there are times when I do not want to practice this. And so sometimes I just choose not to. And that's my choice. And I acknowledge that choice. I say, I'm not ready to try and get myself out of this right now. I really want to feel angry and mad. And I'm going to go for a long walk and I'm going to be angry for the whole walk. And that's fine. Because I know it's a choice that I'm making. And it's okay. But the more that I practice, it's like a muscle. The easier it is to recognize when I have found the next best feeling thought. Because I can't get from being angry with someone to feeling hopeful that maybe we could actually solve this. I can't get there in 1 step. But I get quicker at climbing the ladder. And then the hard step, which might be going from being bored to feeling like, well, maybe there is something that could be done. Maybe that's the hard one because it's new. So I've gotten good getting that far. And then I'm ready to try. Eventually, I can choose when I'm ready to take a deep breath. Like, okay, now I'm going to go for that next one.
When you were describing the ladder, I did have to admit I struggled a little bit to think about when I'm angry. Let's pick angry because I mean the grief and loss, yes, but I find sometimes I cover up and I numb myself from the grief and loss with anger. To be creative enough to find that next the level up, which I'm gonna have to practice this because I'm not sure. But I also know that humans are just creative to the core. I mean, we problem solve, and I love puzzles, let's say, and I love to solve puzzles and to problem solve. So I'm just going to have to give this to myself as a new puzzle on my life now, to learn to sit with these all the way through the emotion, validate it, name it, but then creatively look up what's the next best possible level.
And sometimes it helps when we stop thinking with our brain. Like when I said that baseball bat just showed up for me and then the fence post showed up, sometimes it's fine. I throw up my hands. I can't figure this out. I don't know what's next. And then for me, I go for a walk. Some people go for a run. Some people will create something, like they'll paint or whatever it is for us as an individual, whatever it takes to disengage that thinking part of the brain and let the body wisdom say. And for me, I'll either see a picture in my imagination or I'll just hear this little, well, how about this? And you wouldn't believe the number of times when I see that and I go, oh, you're right. Fine. Yes, that's the next thing. I was hoping that I could just use this as an excuse to stay stuck. Oh, darn. Okay, fine. And then my body says, you know how to do this. Yes. You can do this. Here is the next microscopic, sometimes best next step.
Right. We are habits of creature, that's for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
And I want to thank you so much. I feel like we could talk for another 2 hours for sure. So I think maybe we need to create a next episode or something about where we go on and talk about this.
Can I tell you about the course that I'm teaching?
Sure, absolutely. I would love for you. Yeah.
So in my desire to share these things that I've learned, I've created, with the help of several other people, created a course called Moving Through Emotions. And in it, it's a 4-week course. We meet on, it'll be Monday nights starting on the 19th of April, online. And we combine scent, because emotions and memory and smell are all processed in the same part of the brain. So we use smell and journaling and breathing. And I do a guided meditation together with some Reiki that I send distantly through the ethers, I guess, through the interwebs. And I've run it once already, and people found it really helpful. And because I've been doing this myself, inside of myself for so long, but I haven't had the courage to share it, I kind of forgot that other people might not have learned this yet. Like in the same way that people taught me, I kind of forgot, oh, right. We're all in different spots. And so if people are interested, registration is open.
That's great. So I will put the link in the show notes, and anywhere else I post this, we'll make sure the link is in there that they can catch up with you, and maybe some of your other social media links as well we'll throw in there so people can just follow you and keep learning from you as you're learning from others. Yeah.
It's a pay it forward kind of thing.
Awesome. I do want to thank you not only for just being here and sharing your experience, but with being so fiercely real about it, raw even. And just sharing with such honesty and vulnerability. I so appreciate that in you as a person, and for you sharing that with the listeners today. I'm just very, very grateful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's an honor.
Yeah, great. So thank you so much for being here, and I hope that you stay well.
Thank you, and you too.